The 2026 AFL season is launching this weekend, and everybody in the AFL community are making their predictions of the upcoming season. Most of them play it safe. They predict the same top 10, same bottom 8, and just make a couple teeny tiny changes to the ladder. But not me. I'm shaking up the ladder from top to, 16th. The bottom 2 I think is pretty obvious. But the truth is, there's always 3 changes to the top 8. There's always a team from outside the 8 that makes the top 4. A team from the bottom 6 that jumps into the 8. And the bottom 4 never stays the same. So in this video, I'm going to be making some of the boldest predictions you have seen on YouTube so far. In 17th spot, I've got Richmond winning their 3rd straight wooden spoon. I think there is a huge gulf in quality between Richmond and all the other teams above them. Yes, they impressed a lot of people by beating Carlton and Gold Coast in the early rounds, but they only won one other game after that against Essendon. And they haven't really added any experienced players. They've only increased the number of draftees on their team. And they got blown out by both Melbourne and Essendon in the preseason games, showing that Richmond even struggle against the teams around them. So I think Richmond are headed for a 3rd straight wooden spoon. Oh yeah, I forgot the Eagles were returning to the AFL this year. But look, I think it's going to be a tough ask to expect the Eagles to be competitive in their return season when they just sat out the last season. So I think they're a clear lock to win the wooden spoon. They're the youngest list in the AFL by far. Yeah, okay, they've added a couple decent experienced players like Starcevich. I think he'll be good. They've also added Tyler Young, Devin Robertson. So there's a couple people to work with there. But I just think the Eagles, they're such a young team. They've been quite uncompetitive in the last few years before they were excluded from last year's comp. And unlike Richmond, who get to play Melbourne, North Melbourne, and West Coast, and only have to play one top 8 side in Adelaide twice, the Eagles have to play Collingwood, Fremantle, and GWS twice, as well as Port Adelaide, who I am going to predict to finish a lot higher this year. So I think the Eagles are going to really struggle this season, and I expect them only to win 1 or 2 games, to be honest. In 16th spot, I wouldn't say the biggest slider, but they are sliding, is Melbourne. Look, they've lost Petrarca, they've lost Oliver, Stephen May's retired, Jack Viney's injured, Jake Bowley's injured. Everything's going wrong for Melbourne. It's been a horror off-season for them. And to make things worse, their fixture is harder than several top 8 sides. They have to play Fremantle, Gold Coast, Hawthorn, and the Bulldogs twice. Yikes. So I think it's all compounding on Melbourne. Yes, they bring in Jack Steele, Brody Myercheck, and a couple other players who I think will give them positional needs. But I think Melbourne, look, I expect them to win a few games. I don't actually think they're going to be outright terrible. I think they'll win 6 to 8 games, but I think they're going to struggle with how badly things have gone against them. In 15th spot, I've got Essendon. Again, I see them improving in terms of the number of wins they get, but I think a lot of the AFL teams are going to get more wins this season, so I don't really see Essendon jumping above too many teams. The main reason being they're such a young team. They're actually as young as Richmond, so that alone, I think Bombers are going to struggle. They also do have to play Brisbane, Hawthorn, and the Giants twice, so they don't exactly have a fixture as easy as, let's say, Richmond or North. I think they'll get enough wins against the teams around them. They're generally pretty good at doing that. Yeah, and I can see the Bombers winning enough games to finish outside the bottom 4, push for the mid-tier positions, but I just think with their age profile, I think they're going to struggle a bit this year. Now I'm going to go bold. In 14th spot, a call which is going to piss off half the AFL fan base, I've got Collingwood falling all the way down. It already happened in 2021, and I'm predicting it to happen again. They are old, very old, and they've lost quite a few role players. Players like Myercheck, Hoskin Elliott, Cox, Johnson. So yeah, they're getting old. They haven't really added any young talent of late. They've also got some injury concerns with, their captain, Darcy Moore. We're not sure what's happening with Bobby Hill. He's one of their top players when he is playing, but he's been absent for quite a while, so we're not sure what's going on there. And to make things worse, they've also got probably the toughest fixture in the AFL. Adelaide, Brisbane, Geelong, Hawthorn, they all play them twice. And even Carlton, and I think Carlton could be a bit of a smoky this year. And games between those two sides are always very competitive anyway, for the most part. I think Collingwood are going to struggle this year. In 13th spot, somewhat of a riser, I've got North Melbourne. More so, they just have to get out of the bottom four. It's been 6 years since they've escaped the bottom four. I'm pretty sure that is an AFL era record. Even Melbourne, even GWS and Gold Coast, at their worst, didn't spend 6 years in the bottom four. So just have to get out of there. They're mid-table for age and experience, so they've got the list profile to escape the bottom four. They've got a good midfield. And they've also got one of the easiest fixtures in the AFL. They get 2 cracks at the Eagles, Richmond, Essendon, and even Port Adelaide, I guess. They could nab a win there, maybe. I think this is time for North Melbourne to grow up and actually be competitive for once. In 12th spot, I've got a big fall from the west of the town. It's the sound of the fallen Giants. Green's out for the season. Darcy Jones is out for the season. Callahan, Taylor, Bedford, they're all out for the early rounds. Kelly out indefinitely. The injury toll is piling on for the Giants, and I think they're just going to struggle. They're going to struggle in the early rounds of the season in particular. And then I think momentum is such a big thing in the AFL that I think the Giants will struggle to get a run to make the finals. We saw it with a team as good as Sydney last year, so it's possible for a team like GWS to fall down. I don't think they'll crash to the bottom four or anything. I think they're just too good for that big of a slide. I think 12th spot is probably the worst case scenario for them, but I think, they'll struggle in the early rounds. It's going to seep through to the later parts of the season. They're just going to be very inconsistent, I think. And I think the Giants will struggle to really get a run on this season. In 11th spot, I've got the disappointment story of 2026, and that will be St Kilda. Yeah, all right, they've made a lot of signings, but when you think about it, Ryan's a depth player. What's his name? Flanders replaces Steele. DeConning replaces Marshall, and then Marshall, I guess, becomes a key forward, which is a position he's not really. So I guess the only other real inclusion is Jack Silvani. I think the Saints will be competitive. They'll definitely win more games than they did last year, but I don't think Saints were really that convincing last year. They kind of struggled against the bottom sides. Like, they beat them by like 1 or 2 goals, so they weren't overly convincing. They have an okay fixture, I guess. It's not the easiest, not the hardest. But it's certainly not a fixture that can help them propel into the top 6 or anything. I can see them finishing finals, don't get me wrong. I just think that there are teams better than St Kilda that are better placed to play finals. In 10th spot, one team I've been really impressed in the preseason is Carlton. And yes, I know people are going to tell me, don't pay attention to the preseason, it means nothing. Sure, but beating both Brisbane and Geelong, both of last year's grand finalists in the preseason, well, I guess that shows that Carlton have some sort of intent to compete this year. Look, I don't think they're the highest quality team going around. They have lost Charlie Curnow, which is going to be a massive loss up front for them. They do bring players like Ollie Florent and Will Hayward that, I guess, give them some positional needs. They get Nick Newman back in their defence, after he served the suspension, which is going to be a big inclusion for them. And Jagger Smith, I think he is a lock for the rising star. So I think there is enough for Carlton to improve on last year. They still won 9 games last year. I think Carlton will improve on that, you would think. And I think they've shown in the preseason that they are capable of knocking off some top 8 teams. I don't think they'll be consistent, and they certainly don't have the easiest fixture going around. But also last year, Carlton were actually not too bad against the bottom sides either. So if they can at least beat those teams, and then beat some top 8 teams, I think that they can sneak in a wild card position. In 9th spot, I'm going against the grain here, but I'm putting the Gold Coast Suns in 9th. They brought in Petrarca and Hugo Hagen, and for that reason, a lot of people are excited about what they can achieve in 2026. And yes, I agree with 2 massive inclusions like those 2 players. The sky's the limit for them. But on the other side, they've also lost quite a few role players like Flanders, Buderick, who else? Ainsworth, Fiorini. every good side needs a good amount of role players, and I think the Gold Coast Suns have actually lost a fair bit of depth in the off-season. Even players like Swallow, who actually give him quite a lot of experience, even if he wasn't really in the main side anymore. So I think the Suns, against the top teams, I think they're going to struggle a little bit more this year than they did last year. I think they've actually lost a bit of depth. They'll beat the bottom teams, okay, but I think they have to play more top teams. I mean, they play 4 of last year's top 8 twice. And I know they don't have a very good record against the Saints at Marvel, so that's another bogey game for them. I think the Suns, they'll be all right. They'll make a wildcard final, but I actually am not getting caught up in their hype as much as other people are. Another team I'm not really getting hyped up about is the Western Bulldogs. Look, they should make the 8. They have arguably the best attack in the AFL. They had the 3rd best percentage last year. So, they'll win enough games. They'll win enough games to make the 8, I would imagine. But some people almost everyone was saying, oh yeah, the Bulldogs were unlucky not to play finals last year despite winning 14 games. I would argue they were lucky to win 14 games. They got to beat up St Kilda, North Melbourne and Essendon twice. They're not going to have that luxury this year. They only play Melbourne twice out of last year's bottom 8. Bottom 8. Alright? They play 5 of the top 10 teams last year twice. So if the Bulldogs don't improve on their record against top 8 teams, they could struggle a bit this year. Now, I expect them to beat a few more top 8 sides for what it's worth. But there's still concerns with their backline. There's still concerns about their depth. There's concerns they're too top heavy. So I think 8th is probably around the right place for the Western Bulldogs. In 7th spot, I've got the bounce back story of 2026, and that will be Port Adelaide. Look, the Power should be starting 5-0. They've got North Melbourne, Essendon, West Coast, Richmond, and St Kilda at home in gather round. They haven't lost a home gather round match so far, even against Hawthorn, in a season where Port finished in the bottom 6 and Hawthorn made a prelim. Alright? They are starting this season 5-0, unless something goes horribly wrong for the Power and they're much worse than everyone expects. And once you're 5-0, I think momentum is going to carry through. Now, look, I think there's a lot of vulnerabilities at Port, so I don't actually think they're going to make the top 2 or anything. All right, and I think that after their 5-0 start, I think they will lose quite a few games. However, they've still got players like Butters, for now, Rosie, Horn Francis, who did play against the Eagles in the preseason match, Georgiades. So there's a lot of talent that they've still got on their list to work with. Bergman as well. I think the Power, they made the top 2 in 2024. They've made the top 4 pretty much every season since 2020, except for 22 and 25. So I think Port Adelaide are well placed to bounce back. And not only that, I said they've got 4 of last year's bottom 5 in their first 4 games. Well, they get to play 3 of those a second time. They get to play St Kilda a second time. They get to play Adelaide twice. I mean, showdowns are normally always very tight, and they could go either way, regardless of the ladder position of both teams. So I think Port Adelaide are well placed to bounce back into the top 8 this year. In 6th spot, I've got Adelaide. I am concerned about their mounting injury toll. Players like Keane, Saligo, Rankin, Curtin, they're all in doubt for round 1. I could really be making the same argument that they're going to fall off a cliff like GWS, but I think the one difference between Adelaide and GWS, Adelaide have always recorded very strong percentages, although admittedly that didn't help them in 2024. They had a percentage of 100 and still finished bottom 4. But I think that was a bit of a fluke, partly because they couldn't win close games. I think Adelaide, they don't have an easy or a hard fixture, so I don't think fixture is the biggest issue for them. They're one of the highest scoring teams in the AFL. Great percentage. So I think Adelaide, they'll still be thereabouts. But I don't think they're going to reach the heights of last year. In 5th spot, I've got Geelong. The reason I've got them this low, they've actually got a very difficult fixture this year. Adelaide, Brisbane, Collingwood, Fremantle, and Gold Coast twice. So Geelong have to play against more top 8 sides than previous seasons. So I think Geelong might lose games here and there. There is also a bit of a stat where teams that lose by over 40 points in the grand final don't win a final the next season. And so I don't actually think Geelong will win an elimination final. I think they'll lose that. But at the same time, I just think that the Cats are too good to miss finals altogether. I think that they'll have a good home and away season. I don't think they'll have a great finals campaign, but I think Geelong are still going to be thereabouts. And then in fourth spot, I have got Brisbane. Not first. They just brought in Allen, Draper. Yeah, but here is the thing. They've also lost Archie and Starcevich, so it kind of nets out. And not McInerney, so it kind of nets out. But the main thing with Brisbane is they're actually not that good of a home and away season team. Yeah, they've won the premiership in the last 2 years. And in those 2 years, they finished 5th and 3rd in the regular season. Brisbane are not a dominant home and away side. In fact, their percentage was actually pretty poor last year. So I don't think Brisbane are going to dominate the home and away season. Can they win the premiership? Absolutely. I think they'll go in just about premiership favourites. But when we say that Brisbane are premiership favourites, that means they are premiership favourites starting the final series from 3rd or 4th or something like that. That's what Richmond did when they were in their premiership era, and Brisbane in both their three-peat era in the early 2000s and even now, it's the same with them. In third spot, I've got Fremantle. Just like Brisbane, Fremantle's percentage was quite poor last year. So I don't see them being the sort of team that would dominate on top of the ladder. But they're still a very good side. They've brought in a pretty good acquisition in Judd McVie. But, I mean, they're going to get Hayden Young, hopefully for the whole season this year. Put that in the midfield. Brazier and Sarong. They've got Tracy and Amos up front, and they should only improve this year. Bolden should improve. They've got Clark Ryan in defence. I think their list, also Jackson in the ruck, their list is just about perfect. I think they just need to get more experience. Murphy Reid, he's also emerging as well. He won last year's Rising Star. He might be a superstar in the coming years. I think it's all coming together for Fremantle. I think the only thing that they need is they need to get more games into their younger players. They were one of the least experienced sides last year, believe it or not. I think they need to have a little bit more maturing. They need to be able to learn to not only beat teams, but completely thrash teams as well. They need to start doing that if they want to push into the top 2. But I think Fremantle, they got a decent fixture. They get to play teams like Carlton and Melbourne twice, and the Eagles. Okay? That's 2 free wins there. So I think Fremantle, they should be pushing for the top 4 this year. In second spot, I have got Sydney, jumping out of last year's bottom 10 to make the top 4. There's every reason to get excited about the Swans. They've just brought in Charlie Curnow, and he is going to revolutionise their forward line. In a forward line where they've kind of struggled in terms of their key forward stocks in the last few years. They won a minor premiership 2 years ago. They had an injury toll last year, yes, but, their injury rows have mostly behind them. So I think Sydney can launch back up into the top 2. They get to play teams like North Melbourne, St Kilda, Port Adelaide twice. They have a good record against the Bulldogs as well. So they don't have the hardest fixture going around. That should help them in fighting for a top 2 spot. I just think Sydney, they're one of the top teams in the AFL. They have been for the last few years. Last year was an aberration due to injury, and I think that they'll bounce back into the top 2 this year. And finally, I've got Hawthorn maturing and making a big leap into top spot. They defied the second-year Blues last year, where a team normally makes a shock run towards the finals, then falls off. But Hawthorn didn't do that. They still finished in the 8. They still had 15 wins. They still made a prelim final. This side is ahead of its age. And I think with the players they've got, with the game plan they've got, with Sam Mitchell as coach, I think Hawthorn are going to continue to push to be a premiership contender this year. And based on my predictions, they've also got a quite easy fixture. They get 4 fairly secure wins against Essendon and Richmond. And I'm also saying that Collingwood and GWS are full. I think that's a couple of other double-ups that they will do well against. And even the Bulldogs, they've got a good record against the Bulldogs, at least in the home and away season, not so much in pre-season. I think Hawthorn. I think Hawthorn are going to be a very exciting team this year. Yes, they didn't get Zach Merritt, but I think they're good enough without him anyway. I think Hawthorn will be in top spot. And now we're going to predict the finals. I think Port Adelaide will beat Carlton, and I think Gold Coast Suns will stun the Western Bulldogs to make use of that wildcard position. And then I think Adelaide will beat the Power, but Gold Coast will beat Geelong. So I said Gold Coast wouldn't do well in the home and away season. Well, they've got Petrarca, they get Hugo Hagen. they'll step up for finals in my opinion. In the top 4 games, I have got Hawthorn beating Brisbane. And then I will have Fremantle beating Sydney. So then we head to the semi-finals. I'll have Sydney beating Adelaide and Brisbane beating Gold Coast in the second straight Q Clash. Then the preliminary finals, I will have Hawthorn beating Sydney, and unfortunately Fremantle's fairy tale run will come to an end against the Lions. And I've got Hawthorn and Brisbane playing. And just to make something different, I'm going to predict Hawthorn will win the premiership. And I reckon if that's the grand final matchup, it will be a big matchup because we've got the 2 teams that in the AFL era top the premiership tally with 5 premierships each. And actually, Hawthorn and Brisbane have not played in a final in the AFL era, believe it or not. Well, not in the top 8 system, at least. So I think Hawthorn will win the premiership this year. And now for the awards. Brownlow medal, I've got, well, Nick Dacos finally winning it. The Coleman medal, I have got Charlie Curnow. I think he will come back in a big way against the with the Swans. And then the rising star, well, as I said, I think it's pretty obvious. Jagger Smith. He missed last year with an ACL. He was the top 3 pick, and he's impressed in the preseason. So I think he'll be the rising star. And Norm Smith, well, I guess it's kind of arbitrary because it's based on the team I'm predicting to make the grand final. But if Hawthorn are there, I think Jai Newcombe will win the Norm Smith. I hope you like these bold AFL predictions. Please like and subscribe. Comment what you thought of the video down below. Comment what you thought of my predictions and who you think, how you think the AFL ladder will pan out. Check out some of my other videos, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.